there we are in the Tenderloin. And then Jason said a bunch of and then people were just like, and we had to run for our lives and flee the Tenderloin because we were too much. But we brought down the house, and people with alien tiki mugs chased us down the street until we could get an Uber that took us quietly back to the youth hostel he was staying in. Emphasis on hostel.
What are you talking about, you crazy person?
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we continue our 1950s teenage horror series with I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So, warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, co-author of California Tiki, out now from the History Press. Also in Austin is Mr. Drew Edwards, creator of the long-running indie comic Halloween Man, and out from Comixology and Sugar Skull Media, the new Lucy Chaplin Science Starlet Special. Drew, say hello.
Howdy.
Howdy. In Los Angeles this week, Adam Foshko, my co-writer on California Tiki, also on the California Tiki podcast, director of story and narrative design at HBO. He was also the director of story development for Activision's Call of Duty, Skylanders, and Destiny franchises. Welcome back, Adam.
Thanks. Great to be back.
Happy to have you here. You and I actually just saw one another yesterday because we're doing our California Tiki book tour, and we were hanging out in San Francisco, where neither of us live.
Yeah, which is kind of amazing. I have to go to a totally different town to see you, and it isn't one that you live in, which I think is fascinating. So San Francisco seems to be the place to be.
But that's why we're both really punchy, because it's been a long weekend. And finally, also in Denver, as always, color commentary from the one and only attorney Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello, Julia.
Hello, Julia.
I just said Julia and Denver a lot in that one sentence. It was pretty great. Although it's branding. So, okay. All right. I and Julia actually joined us last this evening. I am not making this up because she was making brownies. She literally
insert Hillary Clinton joke here.
She was literally putting brownies into the oven, and I went and got on the podcast. I'm so it is an honor. It is an honor to be with you. I'm trying to transition into saying this title without sounding like I'm saying a sentence. This movie, I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. This is a film starring Whit Bissell, who was the star of our last movie.
Wait, is your concern that people are going to think that you actually are saying that you were a teenage Frankenstein? Is that why you wanted to make sure that didn't sound like a sentence?
I'm just trying to make the sentence scan properly. I just wanted to sound right.
Oh, okay.
I Was a Teenage Frankenstein is a film starring Whit Bissell. He was the guy who starred in I Was a Teenage Werewolf as the mad scientist there, who had the immortal line, "So you call yourself a scientist." Phyllis Coates is in this. She was one of the Lois Lanes in the television series, Superman television series, and Gary Conway, who's the very handsome dude whose face is the face of Frankenstein at the end of the picture, and also played a related part in How to Make a Monster. So, okay, film came from American International Pictures in November 1957, came out in a double feature with our next episode, Blood of Dracula. It is the follow-up to AIP's box office hit, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, which was released just 5 months before this. They made this movie in something of a hurry. Both films later received the sequel and the fictional crossover, How to Make a Monster, which featured, like I said, Gary Conway. So, the film is I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. Drew, you are our resident Frankenstein nut, so I think we should start with you, and then we'll go Drew, Julia, Adam, and I'll go. So, what are your opening thoughts on watching this again? I assume you watched it again for the show. I Was Teenage Frankenstein.
It's been a long time since I've watched this movie. I didn't actually remember a lot about it. I actually think the first and only other time that I had seen this was when I was in high school. I find this movie to be a giant step down from Teenage Werewolf, which has a lot of interesting thoughts and interesting ideas in it. I think that the acting is a lot more stale in this. Whit Bissell, who I think is very good. It's funny, I feel like we've kind of come full circle, because before we started this retrospective, we did Lost Skeleton of Cadavra,
Yes.
which parodies all 50s B movies, and they make fun of the dialogue of people, saying science all the time. This movie, Professor Frankenstein, inserts, like, you could practically make a drinking game of, take a shot every time Professor Frankenstein says science, because it gets a little absurd. It's enjoyable enough. I mean, it wasn't unentertaining, but like, I just, like, having watched it so close to Teenage Werewolf, all I could think of is this is a big step down. Like, this is a pretty hokey movie, in my opinion. Like, particularly the monster, like Michael Landon is so good in Teenage Werewolf, and the guy playing the teenage Frankenstein isn't nearly as good. Like, he's pretty, like, he says his dialogue kind of like he's reading stereo instruction. I'm being really mean. Wow. Anyway,
Yeah, surprisingly. I mean,
yeah.
uncustomarily.
Again, it's an entertaining, B movie in its way, but like, when you kind of stick it up against the first one in this, I guess, if we're gonna call this series of teenage monster films the AIP did, I think this is a huge step down.
Wonderful. Okay, that's a brazen place to start. That's pretty good. So, Julia, what are your thoughts? Were you agreeing with that? Did you get more out of this than Drew did?
Did you say me or Adam?
Julia, yes.
Oh, okay, I missed it. Skipped out right when you said the name, so I was like,
Oh,
oh.
sorry.
I didn't really care for it, and this is going to sound so silly to say given the kind of films that we review, but I found it unrealistic. Because
come
I was
on.
like,
come on.
I found it unrealistic that a scientist would have an alligator in his wall. Number one, I found it unrealistic.
You don't live in LA.
Everybody has an alligator in their wall in LA, Julia.
That's true. A script in development and an alligator on their wall. It comes with.
Okay.
It's part of being in LA. Go on.
Okay, so it is actually realistic then. Never mind. I stand corrected.
Good,
it is completely 100% believable. I was really disappointed not to have a wonderful Eureka, he's alive moment, because it's just kind of like, wait, he's alive now? When did we skip that? We sort of had electricity, and then suddenly that we were at dinner, and then later on he was alive. And I thought it was really depressing. Again, like I said last week about the werewolf, this time again, but at least in this case, the kid is dead, and then now it's kind of a new creature, but as opposed to the other kid who got, his life stolen from him by the scientist. This guy got his life stolen from him by a car accident. But then this new guy, this monster creature, I mean, and it's always a sad story for Frankenstein's monster, obviously, but it's just such a depressing, sad story to have him be this young guy who just had his whole life ahead of him. I mean, that's just sad in general anyway, when something like that happens. But I don't know. So I found it both depressing, but also not interesting, which is sad, because at least sometimes it's depressing and it gives you a lot to think about, and this one I just was like, there's not really anything there for me, so I didn't care for it that much.
Okay, excellent. Adam, what about you?
Man, I love this picture. No, I can't begin that way. I'm sorry. I thought I would try it and start with the alligator and see where that would take me, but clearly it didn't take me far enough. So right. So let me start this way. As a kid, I was the guy who, probably like some of you, would read Famous Monsters of Filmland. But I also had the advantage of I had paperbacks that had been put together, basically of that Ackerman had somehow made a deal to do. And there were these paperbacks that were Famous Monsters of Filmland paperback. And one of the things that was in this book was, of course, this movie. So this became one of those movies that I didn't see until very late, but I saw a lot of stills from it and was thrilled by the idea. I love the Karloff Frankenstein. I'd grown up with that, and Bride of Frankenstein, obviously. And these pictures. This and Equinox were the two 8mm films back when they actually had films that you could buy in the back of the magazines and even the books. That I wanted to actually buy and see this movie, because you couldn't see it anywhere else when I was a kid. It was never on TV as far as I could tell, and so it took me a really, really long time. And in the interim, I saw pictures like Teenagers from Outer Space. I was a Teenage Werewolf with Michael Landon, as you said earlier, which, by the way, I thought was really terrific. And there was other films that were kind of in that. The Blob, was in that same sort of category as movies, because they were teenagers. They were portrayed, older people who were portrayed as teenagers, who, when you're a kid, it kind of all kind of works in the 50s. And so for me, they all sort of lived in this weird milieu that was monsters and American society and whatever else, and it was really exciting. And then I saw it. I saw this movie, and it was. You're right, and you said it really well, Julia. It pales by comparison. And Teenage Werewolf. In fact, this movie was very, very quickly supplanted by Curse of Frankenstein,
Yes.
the Hammer,
Well,
which was another one of those.
For what it's worth, date-wise, I think this one comes out after, but that doesn't mean that people would have seen it at the same time, because Curse
it was really
British.
just how it was really how I saw it. It was really
Right.
That to me was like, how fascinating is the creature? What is the story? And by the way, you're right, Julia. This is a one of those really bad kind of endings for this guy, and it had a lot to say, I think, about teenagers at the time and delinquency. And this was a very lurid. It's a very lurid Frankenstein. It's a very lurid kind of movie with girls changing and the monster peeking through windows and all that kind of stuff. And it was it was a lot. It was pretty kind of graphic in some of its dismemberment and all that stuff. And it was just meant to be a really kind of lurid movie. And the problem I had, I think, with the Dr. Frankenstein, apart from the script and apart from a lot of things in the story, was the fact that there was nothing redeemable about this particular doctor. And you'd seen over the years all kinds of different portrayals of the doctor and what he wanted, and where he started, and and it's certainly a cautionary tale about the pursuit of science, or the pursuit of a certain thing, barring everything else, and the slipping of your morals into the sacrifice of these things in pursuit of something, and the monstrousness of that. But none of that is here. He's one note, and the guy he creates is a typical teenager with a terrible face, and and it kind of unfolds that way. And it's really kind of unfortunate, because it seems like, looking at it not just as somebody who would have maybe seen it on its own, but in the pantheon of Frankensteins, I guess, it's iconic because of the look of the creature, but it's one of those movies that I hate to say that it's better to almost remember it kind of as people saw it in stills, and not necessarily. There was not a lot redeeming about this movie and it's unfortunate. I would easily watch Teenagers from Outer Space as an example before I would probably spend a lot of time watching this. But that was sort of my Christopher Lee as Frankenstein really was far more eye-catching for me. It was a better kind of story. Just for the record, the things that really turned out well for the monster. Jason and I were talking about this yesterday. The Bride was a very, with Clancy Brown as the monster, really became an interesting thing where things turned out actually pretty good for him.
I've still
Terrible
never
for
seen The
Sting.
Bride. I'm
Terrible
sure
for
that
Sting.
Drew has seen The
Good for
Bride.
him.
I've never seen it.
Yeah, I've seen it a few times actually, but which is
That's
weird.
its own thing.
Yeah, it's a weird movie that I don't entirely know how I feel about, even though I've seen it like 4 or 5 times.
I'm shocked I've never seen it. I'm really surprised, because first of all, Sting plays Baron Frankenstein in that, so it's weird to me that I've never seen it. But yeah, Adam was suggesting that the Dean Koontz Frankenstein series sounds a lot like it is, like ideas in that series are shared by the concept of the monster.
Well, if it has Sting in it, I'm up for seeing it after we get off the podcast.
I am. More than happy. It's got Jennifer
Tonight.
and
Beals.
and a really strange. I thought for some reason that you guys did a podcast about this, and also a really strange appearance by Quentin Crisp in the beginning of this, which has an interesting John Hurt connection. So it's a very interesting odd film from the 80s.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like it, but it's worth seeing. But back to this. Sorry to derail it.
Yeah.
But you digress.
Okay.
But
so
now I want an alligator. The thing that left me with this. Now I want an alligator. I feel like I'm in LA. I should have an alligator.
Because you live in LA, and apparently that's the thing that everybody has. So
they hand them out when you show up here. Yeah, I just feel like they've overlooked them.
Apparently this was a notorious alligator. Like, this alligator apparently was. The story goes that this was an alligator that belonged to a murderer in Texas who had actually fed some people to this alligator. I don't know.
There's
that story. Yeah.
There's a Toby Hooper movie that's supposedly based on it called Eaten Alive.
Why are you guys telling me these things? I'm gonna have nightmares now.
That's gonna cause you nightmares? All right.
Yeah, because that's
real.
No alligators
in Denver, as far as I know.
Right.
That's real.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanna react to all of that because I actually felt like the level of, first of all, this is a fast movie. I mean, this is I've seen a lot of movies that are only about 70 minutes long that seem to drag on forever. And I felt as far as it being a 74-minute exploitation film, clearly made for the drive-in. I thought it did its job well, but here's the main thing. I was intrigued by the level of pure, just, I'm not sure if the word is sadism for Professor Frankenstein, or just egotism, or whatever is wrong with him. He is a very interesting character. Much more so than the character Whit Bissell played in Teenage Werewolf. Because in Teenage Werewolf, Bissell had this idea, and this will get us just into discussing the film, because we open with Whit Bissell, and in Teenage Werewolf, same actor, different character, he played a scientist whose goal was to use psychology and hypnotism to encourage man to devolve backwards into a state that would better be able to survive the coming catastrophes of the environment and so forth. That's a dumb idea, but such as it is, his idea was to save humanity. This guy, this guy is a self-involved, egotistical maniac. He actually, so that he wants to overcome the difference between life and death. He wants to bring the dead back to life, and thereby make himself famous and well known. And just like the character played by Peter Cushing in the Hammer series, he is willing to, beg, borrow, steal, and murder left and right to do it. And the script is sometimes pretty smart, where there's a moment later on. In fact, we'll get to it when there. But I want to leave it at that. I found Bissell's character to be a really interesting and ugly character. Go ahead.
The funny thing is, this is I don't have as much positive to take from this, even though I agree from you. I kind of wondered, though, while watching this, if this movie was a bit of a template for the version of Reanimator from the 80s, even though that was dealing with students and this is dealing with professors. But the relationship between the two mad scientists is very much like the relationship between the two guys in Reanimator.
It's really good.
And the way Professor Frankenstein acts, he's not as good as Jeffrey Combs in Reanimator, not by a long shot, but the two characters remind me a lot of each other.
Yeah, I would believe that. I absolutely believe that that Reanimator may have I was Teenage Frankenstein in its DNA. Nothing would make more sense to me. I also think it's very possible, given that Curse of Frankenstein came out in May, and this came out in November. It was shot earlier in '57. Was this movie influenced at all by Curse of Frankenstein? I do think it's possible in the way that the mad scientist is portrayed. Because if you think about the Frankenstein that's on everybody's mind prior to this would be the Frankenstein from the Universal Pictures, and he was always, although often slightly insane, often slightly egotistical, he always had essentially a good heart, and that's not the case here at all. This guy
I mean
is a
the
sadist.
Colin Clive character of
Colin Clive and Basil Rathbone, and
mm,
I you know, Basil Rathbone is egocentric, but he in the end,
wait,
you
but
know,
he's the brother, isn't he? He's the brother.
No, he's the son of Frankenstein.
Oh, the son. Yeah, but he's the son. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I should have remembered that because it's actually called rather titularly the son of Frankenstein. Thank you. It's supposed to be brother, the brother, Frankenstein's brother, which was the European
Frankenstein's
release, which
brother
explains
is
why it
in
failed.
Ghost
Yeah.
of Frankenstein, I believe.
To be fair, they often get mistaken for siblings because they look like. No, I'm kidding.
he's so
That's what-
he's so fetching and young.
Yeah, exactly.
The
Oh
other
my God.
interesting thing in the
Good.
in the title here is, I was a teenage Frankenstein, and there's this long the Trekker versus Trekkie argument of the horror universe is people who bitch about people calling the monster Frankenstein. But as we discussed in our many episodes about Frankenstein movies, calling the monster Frankenstein has a long, long, long tradition. So it is,
Also,
I guess, wrong, but it's always been the case.
it bothers me that the name is I Was A when they're both dead. The monster's dead and the werewolf's dead. So it's like is it their ghost? Or is the story being told by the ghost of these characters, or what's the story there? Because that's whatever.
If it
Anyway,
makes you
I wanted
feel any better, Julia, in England, this was just called Teenage Frankenstein.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That makes much more sense.
So
well,
you
still,
can think of it that way.
monster, but
Yeah.
whatever.
In the Queen's English, they had proper grammar.
Exactly. Can we please, before we get too far into everything about the monster and all that, talk about this poor woman that is...
This is where, but before we get into the monster, I want to talk about Whit Bissell
Yes.
and his situation. So he is from England, they tell us many times.
Yeah. English.
I'm not.
Just in exactly the same way as Sean Connery was from Spain in
It is truly crazy.
I'm Egyptian. No, you know how that works. You know how that was.
Oh,
You know
Egyptian,
that bit,
right.
Where basically it's like where they basically Russell Mulcahy came to Sean Connery and said, we want you for this part. And he goes, the only problem is, we want you to play a 3,000-year-old Egyptian. He goes, how's this? And they're like, perfect. It's like, well, actually, he's Spanish now. How's this? Perfect, you're in. It was like, yes, of course. He couldn't do anything else, but they were like, again, it's fine. He's from lots of
The thing is, Whit Bissell, Whit Bissell is as English as Ron Howard. I mean, literally, there is not a British like bone.
Yeah.
Well, probably there's a lot of DNA, but there's nothing.
He doesn't
even try.
No.
Yeah, no, he doesn't try at all. But the script tells us that Dr. Frankenstein is English. Hey, look, maybe he grew up here and then emigrated back to Britain and now has returned for this university work, and now his visa's running out, because that's the plot that's going on. His visa is running out and he has to go back.
His visa from what?
From England. I mean,
No, you just said he grew up. If he's an American, you're saying he's not an American citizen. Like
not an American
he
citizen.
used to be here. He learned how to speak English in America, and then he went to England.
Yeah,
this is my
suggestion. He never bothered to.
He probably was the child
he's
of immigrants.
Trying to make it make sense. He's trying to make it make sense.
Yes.
I'm telling you, this movie is not realistic. Okay.
I don't understand. I'm sorry. I mean,
You mean this isn't a documentary?
Wait, Dr. Frankenstein is your name. Yeah. Frankenstein. Yeah. Really? Frankenstein? Yeah. Are you German? No. What are you? I'm English. What? English. Wait, you got a German name, you're from England, and you sound like you're from, basically Connecticut. Yeah. And?
I
don't understand the problem.
Sean, look.
Well, I can't believe you don't think this is realistic.
Well, John Barrowman, actually, who played Jack Harkness on Doctor Who, he's British, and he's always sounded American. And for that matter, Moneypenny never sounded particularly British. He's
John
got some.
Barrowman. Okay, John Barrowman is Scottish American, is how they describe him.
Now you've done it.
Okay.
He was born in Scotland, but he moved to the United States with his family in 1975. So he grew up in America, but he was born in Scotland. This guy is saying.
And what is he a citizen of?
Probably both. This is British American. Yeah, British and American. So he's British citizen and American citizen, is what according to the Wikipedia.
He's here on what? A worker visa?
When John Barrowman is here, John Barrowman is here as an American citizen, and when he's in Britain as a British citizen. So this guy, though, is not that.
Wait, but if he was born in 1967 and he got here in 1975, how?
No, but he probably has an American parent because it says he's British American or Scottish American.
All right. Fair enough.
So back to Professor.
Just trying to explain how a citizen of the UK
you chose the wrong person. I was like, wait a minute, John Barrowman. No. Okay, so back to poor Margaret.
Yes.
Wait.
Yeah.
An immigration attorney. She's an immigration attorney. I just want to say, immigration attorney. She's not a patent attorney. She's an immigration attorney. Don't do this.
Don't get
please
into
approach the bench. Let me give you a word of advice, counselor. You should sit down. This is a terrible idea. But go on.
Okay.
Bissell.
Apologies to everyone out there who has to witness the craziness that is my relationship with my husband. Thank you, Adam, for being our counselor.
All right. Listen.
Such as I am.
Okay, Margaret. Talk about Margaret. Let's talk about Margaret.
Well,
yeah.
There are two important people in the professor's life. One is this just random other scientist that he gets to help him, and that's Dr. Calton, and he's just there sort of to be kind of a weak ass Joe, where he'll just kind of do whatever Professor Frankenstein. And Professor Frankenstein sort of weakly threatens Dr. Carlton. Says, "Well, if you don't help me out with this stuff, I'll turn you in to
you're my accomplice."
And he doesn't even seem to believe it much himself, Frankenstein, and Carlton just sort of so whatever. He's the assistant. And then there's the girl. Now, Phyllis Coates. This is Phyllis Coates. She was Lois Lane, and a lovely Lois Lane, in both the film, the film that George Reeves did before the TV series, and then in the TV series, she was one of two. Noelle Neal being the other Lois Lane on Superman, and she's lovely, and she plays another professor, I believe it is, and she's
a nurse.
Oh, she's a nurse, yes, and she agrees to be his assistant and fiance.
Basically, she agrees to be his slave.
In the same conversation, he's like, "I thought that you could help me out and answer the phone, keep people from getting in my way, and we could get married. How would that be?" And she's like, "That's the nicest thing I've ever heard." And so, this
Jamie kept referring to her as nurse secretary wife. Secretary nurse wife.
Secretary nurse wife.
Yeah. This is, when people talk about bygone eras being misogynistic, I think this might be the sort of stuff they're talking about.
But here's the thing about that, Drew. The only reason it's a bygone era is because the film does not make how he treats her. It doesn't make him a villain because of how he treats her, although it's part of his character. That's the only reason. Because the fact is, there's plenty of relationships that happen now that are very similar to this relationship, where this. And not just women, and men fall victim to this as well, where you have this narcissistic, abusive spouse, and then you become like, they're slaves, and you're thinking, I don't deserve any better than this. This is just how things are. This is just how love is. Whatever, they maybe were abused as children. That happens. But if you portray it in a film today, that makes that guy a villain. And in this film, it's just another character trait, and it's not the thing that makes him a villain. I
Right.
don't think.
I would
could be wrong.
say it does contribute to him being a villain. It's not the first time he kind of gets into her and he slaps her. That seems like it's like meant to set off some alarm bells. And let's not forget, that at one point she's like, I know you made a monster.
Yeah.
I will help you keep this secret, and I will even help you feed it its vitamin shot.
Yes.
And
does she
he
know it's a
still
monster?
She does.
Huh?
She knows it's a project.
Yeah, he still bumps her off because reasons,
Right.
Right.
like, so I don't know if I fully agree with you that like this is not considered negative character traits. I don't actually think that Professor Frankenstein has other than great intellect, I don't actually see him having any real positive character traits.
Right.
He is
No,
pretty
but what
much
I'm
just
saying is, what I'm saying is that this is not the thing that made him a bad guy, although it's just part of what makes him a bad guy. But I don't actually think that this particular relationship is stuck in the past, because, like I said, I know plenty of people. I have clients like this. I've had friends like this. Plenty of people who are in relationships where the person treats them like garbage. They hit them, they do whatever, and they're still like, well, I still occasionally they're nice to me, or I don't deserve any better than this, or whatever it is. And I wish, this is what I say when I'm saying that this film is depressing but not particularly interesting. It's some things like this where I'm like, this story could have gone, even with just a few more lines, it could have been much more interesting, much more compelling. And it's just kind of a side note, oh yeah,
And
he's
you're
abusive,
you're
but
you're absolutely right about that, and you're absolutely right that there are still relationships like that. And I misspoke when I said that, but I still found like there to be kind of a weird level of misogyny through it, not just like the relationship with her, but when the creature sneaks out and this is jumping way ahead in the movie, mind you, when he ventures out and he comes across the girl who of course screams when she sees him.
Yes.
His only the only thing he does is smash through his window and suffocate her with his hand.
Yeah.
Like admittedly,
Yeah, that was awful.
admittedly, Boris Karloff, kills a lot of people.
Yeah, that
as
made no sense
Frankenstein's
at all.
But
that
Yeah, it was super
this
weird.
guy doesn't have like a childlike brain. This isn't like an example of someone
No.
who doesn't know his own strength. Like
Right.
he just seems like he does it out of, like you were saying, Jason, sadism.
Well, and that
Well,
that I have a feeling I see two things going on in this script at once. I see the exploitative kind of obvious stuff that the screenwriter clearly expects is supposed to be in there, and so they're going to put it in the where it's like, well, we have to have him kill a pretty girl. I'm not making this up. I think that's what's going on here. I don't know why. We're just going to do it.
Yeah.
Just like
list.
he's the professor is gonna threaten some other professor to help him out because that's the thing we got to do, and it's not interesting. However, I gotta say, the relationship with Phyllis Coates is interesting. I mean, his constant sort of weird, like trailing her along and all that stuff. That is where the writer is suddenly like kind of firing ideas around, although they are
Yeah, but what
often
I'm
weird.
saying
creative
about it
stuff.
not being as interesting as it could be is that we don't see a reason why she puts up with it. Like I'm saying, is that there are plenty of people who put up with relationships like that, but there's usually something about them that you can see why that is. Like maybe you see the person be super charming, or you see the background that the victim character comes from. In this case, it's just, oh, I'm bored. I'm going to be with this guy. Oh, he's going to treat me like shit. Oh, well, that's okay. I guess that's fine. And there's
Yeah.
nothing there. It's nothing. As far as the monster killing the girl, I can only imagine, and this is a question I think I talked about, at least I think I brought it up last time we did a Frankenstein film, is the idea of if the person dies, and this is true for zombies as well, and then you reanimate them, do they still have a soul? Like, what is it that's now the animating thing?
Yeah,
Assuming
so
that you
let's
believe
talk
in
about the
souls.
monster, the creation
Well,
of the
but I was
monster.
going to say, assuming that you believe in souls, then does the soul go away when the kid dies in the car accident, and now there's no
No.
soul, there's just animating energy, in which case it makes sense to me that he would kill without really feeling
We
any
have
remorse
to
because he has
assume
no soul, no
we have
conscience.
to assume that he kills her more or less unthinkingly because it's not consistent otherwise with the character as presented the rest of the film, because this character is generally a kind doofus.
What
He
makes you think he's kind?
cries. I mean,
No, that doesn't
well,
mean he's kind. It means he feels pain.
that's true. I mean, he's sad. There are all kinds of things going on with,
He's pitiable, like
yeah.
but
Yeah, but what I'm
you
saying
know
is
the,
just because you feel sad doesn't mean you have any
No,
compassion
you're
for anyone
precisely right. Because I just now thought about the fact that he kills Phyllis Coates as well. And the murder of
else.
Phyllis Coates is the thing that leads me to think the most that the screenwriter had seen Curse of Frankenstein. Because the scene where he locks the girl in because she's inconvenient to be killed by the monster is played, blocked, everything almost exactly like Curse of Frankenstein, which came out less than a year earlier.
that death though is the most to me like needless, because she was like all
Yeah.
in team
She was
mad
on board.
scientist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He finds her inconvenient. It's truly crazy. It's truly nuts. He doesn't seem
He's
to get
worried she'll
any.
still rat him out
Yes,
for
that's exactly
no
right.
apparent reason, because
Yeah.
she could have done it by then.
And he doesn't seem to get off on killing
Because
people.
she went no, but he's irritated because she went into his stuff. It's like a kid going, "Get
Right.
out of my room," and then getting
No,
mad, throwing a
that's
temper tantrum.
that's exactly right. It's anger and narcissism. He doesn't have
Yeah.
any. There's no like. When I say sadism, I'm probably even being wrong with that. It plays as sadism, but really it's just unfeelingness, because he's not. There's no like sexual thrill of being mean or killing her or anything. That it's just pure. It's purely that he seems completely incapable of thinking about what other people are feeling.
He's kind of an Iceman in that respect, because like when
He's
you think about the way he he's made this being
Yes.
painstakingly, and he's just gonna disassemble him for shipping, which I thought
Yes.
was
Yeah,
the
that was
most
super weird.
I thought that
Truly.
was the most interesting idea in the whole movie. It's like
Well,
Dr. Frankenstein's gonna take apart his monster and reassemble him
Mhm.
somewhere else.
absolutely. All that stuff. The fact that actually let's work our way back up to that, because how does he make this monster? The monster comes about. He has the idea that he's going to make a monster from parts, and so luckily, right outside of his laboratory, there is a big fiery explosion, and so he and his
It's a
partner,
car accident.
yes, and he and his partner go and steal a big hunky teenage body and chop off the parts that are too damaged, including apparently the brain. So I guess they get the brain from somebody else, and they
From a very
make
convenient car accident.
Mhm.
yes, right,
Like-
and whose ever brain is in there when he puts the new body together and zaps it with whatever process he zaps it with. The guy he has language and so forth, but he has no memory of his prior life. There's no like in theory, if your brain were put into somebody else's body, you would still be you. But apparently, in the Frankenstein process, you bring the brain back to life. It doesn't have any of the personality memories
Thank
of.
goodness for that.
Yeah,
Except he wants to meet girls.
he wants to meet girls because he's a teenager and he's big. He's a big dude. He's like all muscular. And very quickly, like within 2 days, he's like, he's pumping iron down there because he's got nothing else to do. Um, and these are truly the goofiest parts of this movie.
Does he sleep in the drawer, in the morgue drawer, or does he
Of
just?
course, who wouldn't? I mean,
Yes,
honestly,
that's so
it's
absurd.
realistic. It's realistic. This is what would happen. Stop. Wait. So wait. I just want to take a moment, and I want to just getting back to the sadistic nature of the Doctor. There's one line in here in particular which I just hold up as the poster child of lines for this kind of thing, where it's like, oh, they're talking about anesthesia and sort of like in the pain the creature will feel or whatever, and they say, hey, we can we'll anesthetize or whatever so he won't feel pain. He's like, no, I want him to feel pain so that when I take it away, he'll have gratitude.
Yes.
And I'm like, wow, that must have been a moment in the writer's room.
Yeah, no kidding. That's in keeping with other
okay.
stuff there. Like when the creature wakes up and he is sad and mortified and traumatized and he cries, and the professor's reaction is as though is truly alien. I mean, he goes, "That's amazing. The tear ducts work." That's like,
Right.
so boy, I mean, this guy is a piece of work. Yeah, and he's
He's
very
Well,
still
that's the
consistent.
evil.
stuff that's the stuff that reminds me of Herbert West. Like
Yes.
oh, it's
Oh, right.
amazing, the tear ducts work. You know,
Yeah.
I probably was understating the, you know, and now that we're actually talking about his performance, he's better than I was saying in my opening thoughts. It's just that I wish the writing was more consistent,
Yes.
you know. It's like you have a central character that is potentially interesting surrounded by a bunch of stuff that's sort of meandering and dull.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're exactly right. So the what happens is, let's see, he gets somewhere along the way he gets rid of Phyllis Coates, but other than that, the monster escapes and goes wandering down the street, and he sees the girl. Like we said, he spies on a beautiful girl who is, in the back room while a party is going on, in this, I guess it's a dorm. I don't know. There's a big party going on, but there are people of all ages actually at the party. Anyway, he breaks into the window and the girl sees him. I guess we can interpret this as, in a panic, because the girl is screaming, he kills the girl. But none of it makes any sense. It's purely exploitative. It's purely, hey, I know that we got to have the monster kill a beautiful girl, so let's do it here. Makes no sense at all. But
The
that's what.
makeup is really striking
Oh
though.
my God,
Nothing
yes. Right. So the idea is, he's kept the busted up face of the head, because he's kept like this head and torso and one arm and one leg, and he's gotten parts from others, and he put a new brain in here, but the face is all busted up, and so that's, you have to see this makeup to sort of understand like what the heck it looks
And
like. 'Cause
again, it's part of Frankenstein's need to control. Like he needs to control the girl, and so when he can't control her anymore, he has her killed. He needs to control the monster by making him feel pain and by making sure that he's like you have to behave well enough to deserve an attractive face because right now
yeah,
I need you to not want to leave. I need you to want to stay here. And so if you leave, people are going to hate you because you're ugly. So you have to stay. Once I've decided I'm satisfied that I completely control you, then maybe I'll give you a normal face.
yes. Yeah. And here's where everything I said about the monster being sympathetic kind of goes away. Is okay, so maybe we could imagine that this was a weird Lenny thing where he killed the girl because he got upset, and who knows,
Right.
and he was confused. But then they're like, okay, it's time to get you a face, and so they start driving around, pointing at
Like
people,
you do. Like you
like,
do.
yeah,
This
shopping.
yeah, that's
That part's
realistic.
realistic. Yeah, that part's
Shopping
Yeah.
realistic.
faces. And they find Gary Conway, the actor who plays the monster, making out with a girl by the side of the road, and so they murder
Jason
him.
goes, "Hey, that's the actor who plays the monster." I was like, "No kidding."
Yes, yes.
Anyway, this
Like,
one.
obviously that's what's going on. I hadn't even thought about it personally. So they transfer this doctor is amazing. I mean, because he's able to transfer a face onto this head, which is a hugely, hugely difficult operation
Never to be
that
done again until John Travolta and Nicolas Cage.
we still in real life, this is a super
Nice.
hard thing. Yes.
Nice. Nice.
No, indeed.
I'm giving that to you.
All
Yes.
right. Thank you.
So I should mention that in Eyes Without a Face, they do this,
Oh,
and
okay.
the
I was wrong.
whole movie is about how difficult it is to put a face on somebody's head, and if I recall, it gets rejected. So, but whatever. For Whit Bissell, it ain't no thing. He can put a new face on your head. No problem. And so now we've got Gary Conway looking good. I mean, he now looks like a male model. And once the stitches are gone, he's just going to be able to walk around, which means that Whit Bissell's experiment is a complete and thorough success. He has completely successfully put a man together with a brain from over here and a torso from over here and whatever.
Except the fact that it's that his creation is murderous.
Right. He's
He
killed a.
doesn't mind that so much.
Yeah. No, I guess
He
I guess we
likes
have to
that.
we have to take that seriously. Yeah, he's somehow, most of us make it through our lives without killing many people, and with
Many
Many
this,
people. Many
not
people.
not very many of us make it through our lives without killing any people, but most of us do make it without killing many people.
Jason.
yes,
Ixnay on the Oirlay.
right. But this guy has been around for like a week and he's already killed like 3 people. So yeah, it's very possible that there's something wrong
So-
with Gary Conway.
I have to say that the thing that I love about the climax of this movie
Yes.
is when he's describing what they're going to do, how they're going to take the creature apart,
Yes.
ship it to England, put it back
England.
together,
Mhm.
and then and then they're going to present them to the world. And I love the fact that his mad scientist partner is like, yeah, this plan is crackpot. It's never going to work. Like he's gone along this far, but he's like, yeah, we're not going to get away with this. And the thing is he's absolutely right. Like this is how insane Professor Frankenstein is, because like he doesn't realize the partner asks where the wife, the fiance is. He's like, oh, she went away. You know, she had
Yes.
enough. And he's like, oh, well, can I call the hospital and maybe I could persuade her to come back? Oh, I don't think she went back to the hospital. And it's just like
he lies like a 4-year-old basically.
Yeah, for such a smart guy.
Those cookies were gone before I was born.
Right. Yeah. So, Whit Bissell, he really literally doesn't think beyond the room that he is in, and it is remarkable. I do like that character. So yeah, Dr. Carlton runs out, gets the cops, brings them back, and we have a thrilling climax where the monster, no longer trusting Dr. Frankenstein, throws him down to be eaten by the alligator. And then as the police bust in, we are suddenly in color. That's very exciting, although I'm sad that we didn't get to see Whit Bissell in color. And we're suddenly in color, and I don't know how to describe this. The monster staggers backwards and knocks it into an electrical panel, which electrocutes him, which is terrible.
It seems like not very good construction.
Yeah, that is not OSHA compliant to have like a big panel on your wall that if you touch it, you will die.
Electrocutes you.
I will say I've taken tours of parts of Dish Network up in Cheyenne at the Uplink Center, and they have giant rooms where if you touch any of the equipment, you will die. But I will say also that there are big signs everywhere that says don't touch any of the equipment.
Well, he didn't have to have that sign because he knows, because he's the only one
That's true.
who goes in there. He and the guy, the other
It's a really valid point. If you had a workshop where only you ever went, would you need to put guards on your circular saws? And I would submit that you still should put the guards on your circular saws, because who died and made you impenetrable. But yeah,
the more you know.
Yes. And it's in and it's in color. This is something, by the way, that happens in How to Make a Monster, is that as the movie is coming to an end, all of a sudden it snaps into color. That is so neat. I'm so glad they did that. They do it here. They do it in How to Make a Monster. I think they do it in like another movie that I'm not thinking of right now, where at the end the sort of last moments are in kind of vibrant color. The problem is there's not a lot of color going on in this lab, so it's okay. Whereas the color ending of How to Make a Monster is gorgeous because it's in this weird throne room and there's torches and masks on the wall and all kinds of stuff. And that's the end. It is interesting to think of this movie in comparison to I Was a Teenage Werewolf, because I think all of us agree that I Was a Teenage Werewolf had much more compelling emotions, for sure.
It's just better acted overall. Like
Yeah.
like every character seems more multidimensional.
Yeah.
And even the bit parts, like no one's really giving like a bad performance. in that. And this is this is like a lot of people kind of giving. I hate to sound like I'm being cruel, but this has a lot of people giving kind of wooden.
Yeah.
When people make fun of B movies, like this movie has a lot of the types of performances that people, like the best B movies. The reasons why I like watching movies like this is when they're low budget, but they have ingenuity,
Yes.
and they have actors that are still really trying to get something from the material. This doesn't really have a lot of that to it. There's some interesting stuff. It's not devoid of it. I feel like we've pointed out the stuff that is interesting about it.
Yeah.
But I Was a Teenage Werewolf kind of rises
Yes.
over your meager expectations of it. It's way better than it has to be. This is just about as good as it needs to be.
Yeah. I guess that's true. Go ahead, Adam.
And maybe less.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like as much as it needs to be, and then 10% less. It's there's a thing where I think this occupies a particular place. This could be driving a fair. It could be there's something to it. Like you could see this fitting into a summer programming or something if it was like and doing the theater circuit or something like that, or a Friday night date thing or whatever it is, or after a matinee monster movie kind of matinee thing. So it has like the stuff that it's got the girls and the murder and the it's lurid enough, and it's got young people in it, so I could see it trying to. I just said young people like an old person, which is hilarious, but it's got people in it, young people in it, that appeals to the demographic of having teenagers come in and see this movie. This isn't a movie made for, I think, adults, working adults, people who were watching monster movies. Whatever that demographic was back then, it seemed like that was just it had stuff in it that they did sit around and go, okay, well, we need to kill the girl now because that's the thing that's gonna keep them in their seats, or they're gonna hide. I mean, it looks like it's put together in that way. I think you rightly pointed out an exploitation movie, but it actually probably had the opportunity to be potentially more, but it is about as good as it needs to be, minus about 10%. It really just kind of falls short from the perspective of, I don't know, you want this to be so much more. You want this to be something that, even when you look at like War of the Colossal Beast, or any of those pictures that were like that, any of those kind of movies where there was a poignancy, there was a tragedy to kind of what happened, like, even to the titular characters. What's interesting is, there is tragedy here, but nobody really, it's superficial. Nobody cares. Nothing to it. Monster cries, you don't really care. It doesn't deliver on the things that and I'm probably expecting way too much from it. But it seems like it would do more.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, because Teenage Werewolf, like if you look at the Universal monster movies, which is what these two films are kind of trying to take their lead from, Teenage Werewolf does kind of manage to graft the sort of pathos of the Larry Talbot character into the Michael Landon character, and it's kind of this perfect fusion of like a broody James Dean type and Lon Chaney Jr., whereas this doesn't really deliver on the tragedy that is inherent in any of the Universal Frankenstein films. But it just, like, the hokey stuff just seems that it's kind of what Julia keeps going back to. The hokey stuff seems twice as hokey because there's not anything to elevate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good. I think we should get our closing thoughts on this movie, and then we'll get our endorsements. And I cannot wait for us to come back for the next one, because it's going to be fascinating. So I think we started with Drew. That sounded almost like a summation, Drew, but is there a capper that you'd like to put on that?
So I think this movie was interesting to watch in the context of having just very recently watched I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and I actually would recommend people watching these as a double feature because I think it's an interesting experience. I do not like this movie very much. I didn't hate it, but I don't know. Like I can't really ever see a reason for me to revisit this again unless
Sure.
and again in the context of doing it in almost an academic way like I just suggested. But yeah, it's not a particularly great film. It is a big step down from Teenage Werewolf, which has a lot going on in it. This is just kind of a low rent monster movie, and that's kind of a shame.
Excellent. Julia, where are you landing here?
So I think that what upsets me the most is I really like how Drew put that about how there's nothing to elevate it. The fact is that if this film didn't have some of the darker themes in it, I'd almost like it more because it would feel like it's hokey, but it's just hokey on purpose. I guess it's supposed to be. But it's like they tried. I think we kept talking about you guys kept talking about the elements that were included that were from other films. I feel like it was like somebody's checklist that they were just okay. We got to include this. We got to include that. And if they would have had either less things on the checklist, and then devoted more time to any given one, or done them, all the things on the checklist to some completion, it could have had the potential to be a good film. Like like I say, the abuse plot, or the
Right.
issue of wither the soul, that kind of thing, or the kid, the fact that the teenager, lost the potential future that he had in his life, and all that. Any of these themes could be explored, or the killing of the young woman. All of that, it could have been interesting. Any one of them could have been interesting, but instead they just did this checklist of, okay, we got to get this in there, got to get this in there, and none of it is explored to its potential. So it's almost worse for including those things than it would have been if they just would have just made a very simple monster movie, in my opinion. So yeah, it's interesting to explore because it kind of makes you think, okay, what is it that makes a good film? And you can see it in the absence of it. It's like a lot of films we watch, we go, okay, well, this is a good film for these reasons. This one's like, well, those are good films because because this is missing all those things, and and other films have it. I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm blathering, but anyway,
No,
I
that's
didn't
good.
really,
Well,
I didn't love it, and but I'm glad we watched it because it was interesting for that reason.
Julia, you talk about the Frankenstein monster potentially not having a soul. Maybe we're watching a movie that doesn't have any soul
There
put
you
into
go.
it, or at least very much heart.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep.
Adam, where are you coming down on this?
I think we're all saying largely the same sort of thing.
Mhm.
I think there was a huge potential to be able to make something a little bit deeper, but I think it occupies a place in history. If it is a particular kind of movie. I think it probably now occupies like an area where you kind of like, it's like the outer markers of this kind of movie, and you kind of say, okay, here are the things that some things are, I see where they headed with this, but this kind of is not the kind of movie you want. We're pointing at it, saying that there are things in here that kind of start off in a particular direction. They don't resonate with us. We don't like it. It becomes almost cautionary. Like this feels like a cheap version of a movie in the Frankenstein lineage. So and it really becomes almost like cautionary tale more than anything else. I clearly don't like this picture. Again, I think this is a movie that I liked a good deal more when it was just stills,
Yeah,
and
I
I
think
could sort
that's
of imagine what it was.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where I come down on it. Where for me, I think if I were to look for something that kind of steers away from it a bit, I still would go to the Christopher Lee Frankenstein. That to me becomes, I think that fills a particular area, which is a variation on the theme. It's just different enough for me to feel different. And by the way, those people from England were from England, and they sound like they're from England. So much more realistic, Julia. So I think
Yes.
I think it's
Were there any alligators in the walls? My question.
Yeah.
Yeah, aren't there always?
So I got nothing to add other than that I was really moved by the point you made, Adam, about the fact that for a lot of us, these movies were intended to come and go, and really probably not to be discussed beyond the 6 or 8 weeks that they would be sort of making the rounds as a new uh, drive-in picture, and then they'd be gone after a couple of years. Nobody would remember, and that's not actually what happened. Instead, we've turned out to have long memories from movies, and we're still discussing it. But I agree. It's much more interesting just to look at the design of the creature makeup than to contemplate this actual film. I think I liked it a lot better than you guys, but it's certainly not something I'm going to stick on and watch in the background anytime soon. It's not one that's gonna particularly stick with me. Um, so that's good. I think that we handled I Was a Teenage Frankenstein very well. I do want to answer one more thing that Julia asked. She said, "Why are the titles for these things I Was a Teenage when they have these tragic endings? They have tragic endings because they're monster movies, but the I Was a Teenage, that actually is an old it comes from pulp magazines. So you would have these like men's magazines that would have titles like, I was an assassin behind the lines, or it might be something salacious and immoral, like I was a womanizer in the church or something. So there was always this really glaring, salacious, exciting stuff, and it always had an "I was" in the title. So by naming these movies that, you're already winking. There's already an element of playing along, because of course the movies have nothing to do with that style. It's just a reference. So by you're setting people up already with the notion these movies are not intended to be taken that seriously because they have these ironic titles. So there you go. That's an old construction. Um, I'm dying to know what you guys are going to endorse, because since we're on this slower schedule in the summer, means we don't get to talk as much. So Drew, do you have anything that you would like to recommend?
I recommend that people donate to my Indiegogo that I am launching this next week,
All
because
right.
I am crowdfunding for the first time. I'm crowdfunding for a Halloween Man special called the Bat City Special, and it's all Austin
Huh.
artists. And the way this came about was there is a regular, it's like a mini con. It's a local thing that happens every year called Nerd Cave, which I've talked about several times on the show. And last year my wife actually said, "Oh, what would be a fun idea is, you work with all these artists that are from all over, but all these people that are right here in town. Why don't you do something that's all local people?" So I approached them, and the way I went about doing the stories is I said, "Hey, you tell me what you would like to draw, and I will try to write a story that includes as much of that as possible." Like I had
That's
one
cool.
guy that said, I like drawing robots, I like drawing zombies, and I like drawing gorillas. And I was like, okay, I literally found a way to have robots, zombies, and a gorilla all in one story. I had another guy say, like, I like classic horror actors, and I want to draw something with that. So I came up with a story where Solomon, Halloween Man, is going to a paranormal psychologist to talk about his undead state. And I decided, well, we'll just make him part of the Van Helsing family, and he'll look like Edward Van Sloan
Love
from
it.
Dracula. So that's kind of where we ended up with. And like I said, we're launching the Indiegogo. We have perks, we have prizes. There's a very, very wonderfully hokey video that is going to be on that. So I encourage you to open your hearts and your wallets and help fund the Bat City Special.
Wonderful. That sounds cool with all the different artists. Julia, what about you? I don't know if we've discussed at all what you were going to endorse. What's up?
Oh, you know what I'm gonna endorse.
No, I
Dun
really
dun
really
dun dun
don't.
dun 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 dun
Oh, of
dun dun
course.
dun dun. Da-na-na. Oh my God, Mission Impossible movies are so fun. I love them so much. I thoroughly and completely enjoyed the new Mission Impossible film
It's number
Fallout.
6.
It's
Yep.
super, super cool.
Wait, they're up to 6 of those?
Yes, and they're all awesome. This one is not disappointing at all. It's super fun. Tom Cruise does all his own stunts, which is ridiculous because they're the stuntiest of the stunts. They're amazing. And you know, Superman is in it. And now I'm forgetting his actual name. That's not Superman. It's
Henry Cavill.
Henry Cavill, thank you. Henry
Yeah.
Cavill with a mustache and 5 o'clock shadow beard, looking every bit as hot as he does without said facial hair. He's great. Alec Baldwin is fun. It's just a really enjoyable film. We took Tom Cruise's advice and watched it in IMAX, and it was worth it. It was just nonstop fun. It's not deep, but it's not meant to be deep. Unlike this film, it didn't try to explore some really deep topics without actually accomplishing it. There's no deep topics in this film. It's just fun, and I highly recommend it.
Wonderful. Adam, what about you?
I'll tell you, I stumbled across something that I didn't quite know what to make of. I'm just going to throw it out there because I'm going to put it in the curious list of curious curiosities, and that is, and I'm sure you guys have seen it, and I can already guess where this is going to go. There is a Sean Bean series that's on Netflix that I'm sure you guys, in the Frankenstein vein, called the Frankenstein Chronicles. Have you seen this?
I have. That was actually
yeah.
a previous endorsement from me. That's an excellent show.
I was really surprised. I thought it was going to be, as Jason would say, some cheap ass shit. Oh wait, did I say that? No, I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be really terrible. I didn't know what to expect. It just seemed like, oh, they're trading on Frankenstein. It's got Sean Bean in it. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be a thing. Great Frankenstein. I was like, okay, and surprisingly good. It's interesting. So I just happened across it and stayed with it, and it kept my attention. So it just tells me that there's occasionally good Frankenstein stuff that continues to come through. So, that was surprising. And again, they speak English.
Wonderful.
English.
My only endorsement, oddly enough, is going to be log rolling, where so it's the thing that we are up to, because otherwise it would have been Mission Impossible. But because we already mentioned Mission Impossible, let's see, Adam and I are going to be doing signing California Tiki a lot at a show called the Tiki Oasis, which is coming up this week from Wednesday to Sunday, actually Thursday to Sunday. So if you're around San Diego, you might consider that. We just finished doing a Tiki show at the Alamo Drafthouse in San Francisco, and we're going to do it again in Austin and again in Dallas. So if you find yourself in San Diego, Austin, or Dallas, figure out a way to come see us and hang out. And in fact, Drew, meanwhile, is going to be touring with Tony, and they're going to do Dallas on a different date.
Drew does Dallas? What? Drew does Dallas?
Drew does Dallas.
Oh my God.
What is the date, Drew, for
Anime Fest? We are doing a anime Frankenstein movie called Empire of Corpses.
Wonderful.
Selected by Tony, and that is going to be unlike the previous Anime Fest that we've done live podcasts at, which have traditionally been on Saturday night. We're actually going to be on Friday night this year. I believe we are on at 11, but please double check that against the Anime Fest. I think it's 10, but please triple check this against the ever-evolving Anime Fest schedule, which is on their website. So I'm very, very excited. I'm glad that they had us back. Now this has been several years in a row that we've had with this relationship going, and I'm super, super stoked to keep it going. And Jamie is going to be there with us, and for the very first time, Tony's wife and bandmate from Rise
Yeah.
from Fire is going to be boy, like it's her first time being on the show, and she's doing a live show. So
Isn't that cool?
that's a brave
Right.
lady,
Well,
right?
luckily
Rain
she
knocks.
performs. Rain performs live all the time, so she's gonna
It's
kill it.
different. Oh, she's gonna do great. I have no doubt that she's gonna do great. But it's different than being in a band.
That's
So
for sure.
I think
So
I think she's
I
gonna do
have to,
great.
I have to plug Rain, because Rain is my superhero. She is not just in a band. She directs, and she writes and directs musicals. She is a badass. She can do anything, and she has a PhD on the side, by the way. Anyway,
That's pretty impressive.
yeah.
So, all right. So a lot of stuff coming up. I'm super duper excited. All right. Our next film is 2 weeks hence. If you go to the Castle of Horror page, we've posted an image that lists all the movies that are coming up. Our next film, I believe, is 2 weeks from now exactly, which is
Unless
Blood of
you're at
Dracula.
anime.
That'll go up as well. And when we get back together for this teenage series, it'll be Blood of Dracula, which should have been called I Was a Teenage Dracula, and for some reason it wasn't. But that's what it is. It is a female version of I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and I'm super excited about it. So with that, I want to say thank you. If you are listening and enjoying the show, come to the Facebook page. Let us know what you're thinking. Engage us. We had some nasty things to say about this particular movie, but you might think that it's genius and you want to talk to us about it. I think that'll be a fun conversation to have. So I can't wait. I can't wait to be back very soon. Adam, thank you for joining us. And
Totally.
everybody, have a wonderful, wonderful evening, and tell your friends. Thanks, guys.
Night.
Thanks. Good night.
All right.